Here's what Will Packer said on ABC.
As they were talking, he was being very dismissive of those options. He was like, no, I'm fine. He was like, no. And even to the point where I said, Rock, let him finish. The LAPD officers finished laying out what his options were. And they said, would you like us to take any action? And he said no.
Now, Packer did say that Will Smith reached out the day after and apologized for essentially overshadowing his success. Unfortunately, many others also feel like their success was overshadowed. Erica?
Yeah, Camila Bernal with the latest for us. Appreciate it. Thank you. Our next hour starts right now.
So we're in a bomb shelter in Odessa, and this is where they're making bulletproof vests.
All of these vehicles have been branded with the Red Cross to try to ensure that they cannot be attacked on the road. I interviewed a young girl who was shot through the face, her mother says, by a Russian soldier while trying to make this journey.
You can see charities from all over the world. Everyone here really sincerely feels that this is a humanitarian crisis that they have to address.
It's so difficult. It's psychologically challenging, but when all of your life is back there in Ukraine, your soul aches.
If we do not stop them here in Ukraine, definitely they go first. Definitely we need more weapons.
Thanks for joining us this hour. I'm Erica Hill in New York. Pamela Brown has the night off. You are in the CNN newsroom. It is 4 a.m. in Ukraine, that country now in its 39th day of unprovoked war from Russia. There is word now that Vladimir Putin and his generals are shifting their military strategy. The Kremlin's new goal: seize control of eastern Ukraine by early next month. That's according to several U.S. officials familiar with the latest intelligence. Also today, yet another reminder that any suburban neighborhood, any city square, any civilian building or home is a target for lethal Russian firepower. You hear the shots, you hear the explosions, you see the civilians running, scattering there. Why were they being targeted? Well, their apparent offense was peacefully protesting Russian occupation of their town. We have another look at that attack for you from a different angle. At least 4 people were reported injured. Meantime, Ukraine's deputy defense minister says the Kyiv region has been, quote, liberated. And these images are lending some support to that claim. Outside of Kyiv, Russian forces have apparently abandoned a strategic airport, which they had captured on day 1 of the invasion. In central Ukraine, a Russian general says Vladimir Putin's forces attacked military airfields and a major oil refinery. This, of course, coming just 1 day after Russia accused Ukraine of striking a fuel depot inside Russia's borders. Ukraine will neither confirm nor deny that accusation. In Ukraine, the country's flag once again flying over Chernobyl, the site, of course, of the 1986 nuclear disaster. Russian troops have now withdrawn from the area, some of them reportedly sick from radiation exposure. In and around the capital of Kyiv, there is a cautious welcoming of a reprieve from Russian attacks. But it's safe to say the scars of this war run very deep, as CNN's Fred Pleitgen reports from Kyiv.
Hi there, Erica. Well, it's certainly gotten a lot quieter here in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. We have air raid sirens a couple of times during the day, but by and large, it certainly is a lot less than what we've been seeing this past week and even the past couple of days. And the Ukrainians are essentially saying that the Russians are leaving the districts around Kyiv, are retreating. The Russians, of course, claim that this was always part of their plan and that they're just pulling back right now. What we're seeing now as the Russians are moving out is that they certainly have taken some serious losses. I was out in some of these districts around Kyiv, And we saw a lot of tank carcasses, destroyed armored vehicles, and then just also positions that were abandoned by the Russians as they moved out of here. The other thing, unfortunately, that we're also finding is that there are still a lot of dead bodies that have yet to be recovered. In fact, there was some video that came out of a district called Bucha, which is just to the northwest of Kiev, where the streets just seem to be lined with corpses. The Ukrainians now say they're obviously going to try and bring some of them away and clean that whole area up. The Ukrainians, for their part, are saying that this is definitely not the end. They say they believe that the Russian forces were beaten as they tried to invade the capital, Kiev, and are now essentially trying to regroup. In fact, Ukrainian officials say they believe that attacks will intensify, especially in the southeast of the country, and it's certainly something that they're bracing for, Erica.
Yeah, that's for sure. Fred, appreciate it. Thank you. Also with us tonight, CNN military analyst, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Colonel, good to see you as always. Ukraine's deputy defense minister says the Kyiv region has been, quote, liberated. What's your sense? Has that area been effectively liberated, or is this just more about Russia perhaps repositioning?
Well, Erica, good evening. Let's take a quick look at Kyiv and see exactly how this has worked out. I would say liberated might be too strong a term to use, but look at this. This is the first time that we've actually seen Ukrainian forces here and in this area. So basically what they're doing is northwest of Kyiv. They've got Irpin, which Fred was at, and they have Bucha, and then the next thing is the Antonov Airport, which they may very well have taken now, depending on which report. And then over here in the northeast and to the east of the city, there's substantial areas of Ukrainian efforts right here, and a small one up here. So what these mean basically is that the Ukrainians have taken over some of the territory that the Russians had occupied previously, and they're pushing them back toward Belarus up this way and toward Russia this way. So it's not quite a liberation, but it is definitely going in the right direction from the Ukrainian point of view.
In central Ukraine, Russia struck 2 military airfields and a major oil refinery today, reportedly bombed from the air. We know for weeks now Ukraine has been asking to close that airspace, not happening for a no-fly zone. But when it comes to control of the airspace, does Russia have control at this point?
Not really, Erica, and that's what's kind of surprising about this, the way this war has worked itself out, because the Russians, it was thought, would gain complete control of the airspace, what is called air supremacy in the military jargon, but they've not gotten that. They have air superiority to some extent because they have far more airplanes and they fly far more sorties, in other words, flights over Ukrainian airspace than the Ukrainians do. But what it's basically telling us is that over this airspace right here, there is still an opportunity for the Ukrainians to take out Russian aircraft and to fly their own aircraft, and in some cases, as we saw yesterday, potentially take out Russian installations on the Russian side of the border as well.
Meantime, in terms of help, right? President Zelensky still out there this past week asking countries around the world for more. The U.S. sending another $300 million in support in new aid, including some of those Switchblade suicide drones. What are we seeing in this package? What we know about what is being pledged here? Is this some of the more sophisticated weaponry that Ukraine has been asking for?
Some of it is actually, Erica. Not all of it, of course, and there are things that he wanted that aren't here, like the MiG-29s, for example, the fighter jets that were to come from Poland. But what we have is Switchblade drones, which are a type of kamikaze drone or suicide drone. We have anti-drone systems, armored vehicles, night vision equipment, and ammunition. And let me show you just one of these right here. This is the Puma UAV, and what it does is this shows you how versatile this is. A soldier can basically throw it like a glider, and it's very light, and it can go over any territory that it's directed to. It has a sensor platform, and it can see the things that can be targeted. And that means that all kinds of things that the Russians have, such as their tanks, their armored personnel carriers, all of those are targetable by a team that can take a target out up to 60 kilometers or 40 miles distance. And they have a handheld device, just looks almost like an iPhone, that they can control this with. And that's the kind of thing that the Ukrainians are getting. Very mobile, very versatile, highly effective, And it's very similar to another drone that's out there, and this is made by the same company. These drones are, again, almost handheld. This one can be launched through a tube, and it can go after any target that it's directed to. So they're very versatile, modern equivalents on the battlefield that can take out many of the targets that are threatening the Ukrainians right now.
You know, as we look at all of this, there is such a massive humanitarian crisis on the ground, as you know. Some 4,200 civilians, according to Ukraine, were able to be evacuated through humanitarian corridors today, but only a fraction of those folks were coming from Mariupol. Some 100,000 people still trapped in that city. Why is it so tough to establish these safe passageways at this point?
Well, Erica, I think the main problem is that the Russians don't want to have safe passageways in this case. And that's a real problem, because what you were looking for here is a safe passage out this way from Mariupol, which is the city that's been besieged like you wouldn't believe. Other safe passage areas from here into this part of Ukraine. A lot of the safe passage efforts have been toward Dnipro, right in the center. So these are areas that could have safe corridors. From a technical standpoint, it would be no problem to do that, but the Russians don't want them, and that is the reason, Erica, that they're not happening. And they're basically threatening the entire civilian population with harm, and that is why it's part of their policy, and that is why these corridors are not working at this point.
Yeah, as we heard from Ivan Watson, one of our correspondents, saying to me yesterday, the International Red Cross, someone he spoke with, said they're running out of adjectives to describe just how horrific the situation there is in Mariupol. Colonel, always appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You bet, Erica. Thanks for having me.
Still to come, how do you tell your country you're under attack? How do you report on the war when your family is also on the front lines? Ahead, you're going to hear from a prominent Ukrainian journalist who's doing just that. That's ahead. Plus, the president says he'll release an unprecedented amount of oil from the United States strategic reserves. Will that do anything to help ease those sky-high gas prices that we're all dealing with right now? Stay with us.
Our mission here at CNN and journalists, the news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster.
More breaking news that we are following right now.
You really work as hard as you can getting the facts.
We're learning more about an alleged plot.
It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
When a watch does things beyond simply telling the time, we call those functions complications. And when we talk about watches with complications, we have to talk about Patek Philippe, the most prestigious of prestigious Swiss watch brands. And a classic example of what Patek Philippe could do is the perpetual calendar chronograph. Now, our perpetual calendar mechanically keeps track of days, months, and dates. It also lets you know if it's day or night. It keeps track of moon phases, and it lets you know when it's a leap year. Now that's a lot for a mechanical watch to do. When we talk about the Patek Philippe Perpetual Calendar, we're talking about one of the great watches. This is a major feat of watchmaking.
Today we live in an unpredictable environment and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy, and so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening. There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the US forces in Syria going? And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, weeknights on CNN.
Business never sleeps. As The sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley. Weekdays on CNN.
Russia's invasion understandably changed life for everyone in that country. CNN's Don Lemon spoke with the Ukrainian broadcaster who was the first to announce that the war had begun and learned how she's still staying on the air.
How are you?
I never know what's the right answer to this question, considering who is asking me about this.
Yeah.
I mean, if people from Ukraine is asking me how am I would say I'm fine because I'm alive, my kids are okay, and my husband is alive. But I mean, if somebody from the outside is asking me, I think the comprehension of what is going on will come later, because it still feels, even to me, so unreal.
I'm sure you could feel the pulse of the nation. I mean, you could feel, what was that like?
For me, it was very emotional because apart being a news anchor, the beginning, the start of the war for me meant that my husband was leaving for the army.
Харківщині від вибуху загинув неповнолітній хлопець.
We understood that this war will be in every family in this way, in one way or another way. And that morning, we knew that some of TV anchors were not able to be at the TV station just because they had to take care of their kids, to take them to safety. And actually, that's the biggest discussion I think that I had with my husband maybe a month before invasion, because he was being very responsible about this war. And he said, you have to make me a promise that on the day of the invasion or whenever it starts, you just put your kids in a car and take them to safety, and I go to the army. And I said, what about my job? I mean, I have a mission to go to a TV station, and I don't think it's less important than your mission to go to the army.
Президент Володимир Зеленський.
As you're on the air then, you knew your husband was going to have to go away. Did he go away immediately?
Actually, when I was done with my first broadcast, and on that day, I rushed back home because he was already back from Western Ukraine where he took kids, and he had only 15 minutes to get back his backpack, to put on his uniform, and to go and be at a designated place.
And what was that like?
For me, it was heartbreaking because I didn't know whether, I mean, to tell you the truth, I don't know whether I was going to see him again. I mean, because the guy is going to the war. What can you expect?
How did you decide who goes on the air when? Because I notice when I'm here, I'm flipping through channel after channel after channel. It has a different name on the screen.
Yeah.
But it's the same.
That same picture.
Same picture, same people on.
Now it's divided very proportionally amongst all TV channels who are in this United News. One day we have a night shift, the next day we have morning shift, then we have day shift, and then we have this evening shift. And then we repeat. So it's all equally divided between channels, but we're also all the time in this reserve studio. So anytime somebody cannot be on the air, cannot broadcast for whatever reasons, they feel bad, I mean, they're sick, or whatever happens with their technical facilities, or they have to go to the bomb shelter, we fill in.
There's a backup.
Yes.
But I notice it's just, I think it's just one camera, straight to camera. There's no different, it's not fancy.
Yes, because
there's
it's
no bells and whistles.
Yes, it's wartime.
Is there any understanding for you as a media person that the Russian people are being brainwashed, that they're not seeing free press? And that's why they're in part doing what they're doing? Large part, really, because they're not getting the right information.
You know what? I have a very personal story about this, because my husband was born and raised in Russia. His parents are in Russia. And they've been to Ukraine many times. They've seen us, they've seen people, they know what is going on. But still, at this point, they are brainwashed by Russian news, and they think that we deserved it.
So you don't think you'll have a relationship with your in-laws?
Not very close relationships. We had some actually break after Crimea was annexed.
You had a break?
We had a 5-year break.
You didn't talk to them?
No.
Did he talk to them?
Sometimes, because their parents just saying how the kids are.
Has he spoken to them?
He asked his mom not to text him because he said that it's very hypocritical of her to be asking how he is or showing some care for him when our children are being bombarded by Russian missiles.
Do they believe him?
I don't think so, because they never wrote back.
That's tough.
But you know, having a job now, unlike many people in Ukraine, that's what keeps me distracted of all my worries that I have, because that's the only time I don't think where my husband is, or whether he's alive now or something happened.
It's a nice distraction.
Yes.
You said you have a mission. Is that mission to inform people and not have them be like Russians?
This is the first mission that you said, that inform people and not to be real news and not propaganda. But now I see a special mission for myself, as I was the person to announce that the war has started. I have to announce that it has ended. So I'm waiting for this mission to happen in my life. Hopefully I will see that moment this year.
What will you say?
I don't think that I will have words at that point, and maybe I will start saying something about Ukraine, and will be pushing my partner to pick me up, and will be crying, because I think at that time I will have an excuse for tears.
And our thanks to Don for that piece. Another tragic loss for the journalism community. A Ukrainian photojournalist who has worked with outlets including Reuters, Maxim Levin, was killed by Russian forces in Ukraine, we've learned. He provided a number of compelling, honest images of the war there. He's been a contributor to Reuters since 2013. Maxim was found unarmed, 2 gunshot wounds, according to the Ukraine Attorney General's office. He was, as he describes himself online, a photographer, videographer, father, and human being. He will be greatly missed and remembered by friends as a tenacious reporter who had no fear.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
It's not just for sweetening your tea or drizzling on top of toast. Honey might just have some health benefits too. One clinical trial from back in 2010 found that a half teaspoon of honey did a better job than common cold syrups at easing nighttime coughs in young kids with upper respiratory infections. But be careful, honey should not be given to children under 1 year old. Some case studies show that honey has antibacterial properties. Bees introduce an enzyme called glucose oxidase to honey when they harvest nectar, and this enzyme can generate hydrogen peroxide. Honey is also naturally acidic, so voila, you have a recipe for antimicrobial properties. More research is needed to see just how much of a benefit there is. And a final note of caution, honey is sweet, and so it can affect your blood sugar levels. So remember to enjoy in moderation.
We live in such a fast-paced world where the news has been so relentless. Historic events have happened one after the other. I think that you need that daily appointment with viewers around the world to try and sort through the news of the day. What's important? Why does it matter to me? How do I put it all in context? We follow the news as it happens and where it happens. And then we also take a step back to walk the viewer through the day's news. That is the mission of Hala Garani tonight.
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
We are now in a major point of flux from being a telco into being a techco. And I think we're not the only big company that is looking at it. We are moving it really into a time where we're looking into consumer digital products, enterprise digital products, and really looking at providing solutions, not just providing connectivity.
I'm Will Ripley in Taipei, Taiwan, and this is CNN.
"219 days until the midterms. I know you're probably counting too, but I just want to make sure we have the same number there. This is, though, in all seriousness, a lot of warning signs tonight for Democrats. President Biden's approval rating continues to trend the wrong way, down. This despite a historic Supreme Court nomination and a major crisis as we're looking at what's happening overseas. Two events that at other times just might bring a bump in support. It's not happening. Democratic voters appear increasingly apathetic on top of all of this. 2/3 of Republicans, though, report high enthusiasm for the midterms. Look at this, just half of Democrats. So how concerned should Democrats be at this point? Joining me now, CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein. Ron, always good to see you. You know, we look at this, you have also, we had this stellar jobs report yesterday, and yet that jobs report came on the heels of 3 different polls that found approval for the president's handling of the economy was at 1/3. So 2/3 of Americans say they don't like what he's doing with the economy, even if it is strong. That's really tough to surmount. How loudly should these alarm bells be ringing?
Very loudly. And look, the disapproval on the economy really, Erica, is not that hard to explain, as you might expect. We have not had a lot of moments in American history where we have had sustained high inflation, but when we have, it tends to eclipse everything else. I mean, it is really a giant cloud in front of the sun, blotting out all of the other good news in the economy. It's something that Americans feel every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And it's very hard to see the president's approval rating recovering in any significant way, particularly while gas prices are this high. You know, I talked to a number of leading economic forecasters a few weeks ago who said that originally they thought inflation might moderate significantly by the fall, allow Democrats to kind of avoid the worst. But now with the Ukraine war and the impact on gas prices, they're expecting they still are expecting some moderation, but much smaller moderation. And that's a dangerous trajectory for Democrats in Congress.
You know, there have been some attempts by the administration to really pin not just gas prices, but even some of the other hikes that we're seeing on Putin. And that came up yesterday. I was talking with Labor Secretary Marty Walsh on the heels of this jobs report. And I kind of pushed back on that, reminding him that the inflation was here before Putin invaded Russia. So here's his take on, you know, why we are where we are in terms of inflation and what could be ahead. Take a listen.
When you think about our economy really is a global economy at this point. So what happens in one part of the world will impact other parts of the world. The variants over in China, and we're seeing China shut down many cities because of rise in the new variants over there in parts of Europe. We have to keep very close eyes on that as well, because that will indirectly impact our supply chain, which ultimately can potentially drive costs up. So, you know, a lot of this, some of this is not within our control.
It's not new for Democrats to have a messaging problem, Ron. Let's be honest here. They often have a hard time getting on the same page. But for something like this, heading into the midterms, do you see a message out of this?
No, there's not a message solution to a tangible problem in people's lives that the high costs of a number of things now represent. And as I said, there are serious, prominent economic forecasters who thought that this was going to get better this year, not eliminate, but get better, who now have kind of scaled back those expectations because of the disruptions of particularly the war in Ukraine, but also, as the Secretary mentioned, the potential supply chain disruptions from China's COVID resurgence. So this is going to be a difficult circumstance. Midterm elections, it's a truism in politics. People say that elections are about the future. Presidential elections are about the future. Midterm elections tend to be about the present. They tend to be voters taking a snapshot of where things are at this moment, and when they are unhappy, they take it out on the party in power. And it's worth noting that the last 4 times a president has gone into a midterm with unified control of government, which is what Democrats have now, they've lost it. So there is a very strong modern tradition of voters punishing the party in power halfway through the president's first term in particular. And Democrats right now, their best hope is trying to shift the focus more toward Republicans, toward Trump in particular, because that snapshot is highly unlikely to produce a kind of a positive verdict between now and November.
But wait, really quickly, let me push on that. Pushing the focus toward Trump, right? We saw how that did not work recently.
Right.
Is that really the smartest option for Democrats, is to, look backwards?
No, I pushing the focus toward Republicans, including Trump. I mean, what you always hear from the party in power when people are dissatisfied is that they are going to make the election a choice, not a referendum. That's really hard to do in a midterm. Midterms in a presidential year, absolutely, it can be a choice. In a midterm, it tends to be a referendum on the party in power. And as I said, the last 4 times one party's had unified control of government going into a midterm, voters have revoked it, a pattern going all the way back to 1994. So it's hard to do. But when 3/4 of Americans are saying the country is on the wrong track, which is roughly the number we have now, that is a referendum Democrats are not going to win. So their best chance is to try to focus more voters on whether they support what a likely Republican control of Congress is likely to mean. And one of the things, one of the items in that argument certainly is going to be whether a Republican House or Senate or both would make it easier for Trump to try to steal the 2024 election. That may be the best chance Democrats have to excite their voters, who, as you noted, in the traditional midterm pattern, the party in power, their voters, going back really over 100 years, have shown less interest in the midterm than the other side. It's a pattern we're seeing repeated now. Democrats need to find a way to solve that, or at least ameliorate it. And probably their best chance is to try to focus on what Republican governance would mean for particularly their key constituencies.
We will see if that happens. Ron Brownstein, always good to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, as a Ukrainian official says the Kyiv region is liberated from Russian forces, our Christiane Amanpour speaks with some of the fighters who are showing her some of the Russian vehicles they've managed to destroy.
They didn't see us. They didn't know we were here, so they just started to work on houses. And so I took the tank in my sights and I fired a rocket. And goodbye to him.
I'm Phil Black in Lviv, Western Ukraine, and this is CNN.
All new Inside Africa. Go inside the inventive minds, evolving places, and creative trends of the Africa you need to know now. Nigeria's emerging musical artists are ready for the global stage.
For now, I can record my music in my house, get it on the internet, and distribute it to the world.
Inside Africa on CNN. in association with Zenith Bank.
Strikes that hit this facility.
This is as close as you're going to get.
Just look at the utter destruction caused by this massive explosion. Imagine the good fortune of the truck driver. He managed to survive.
More than a month into the war here in Ukraine, and the refugee crisis continues.
It is not even remotely close to being a ceasefire.
In Kiev, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Lviv, this is CNN.
The Ukrainian soldiers who have successfully defended Kyiv say their stronger morale and spirit give them an advantage over the Russians. Life in the capital, though, isn't exactly easy. People there are facing acute shortages. CNN's Christian Amanpour has more.
The first thing you notice approaching the front northeast of Kyiv are the lines of villagers waiting for humanitarian handouts. They receive a bag of bread and basics to get them through these difficult days. The first week of the war, a shell hit us near the greenhouse. We barely survived, says this woman. We had help from strangers around us. They gave us bread and canned food. We wouldn't have managed otherwise. No one here knows when this war will end or whether Russia still has designs on Kyiv. The front line is about a mile away. For now, an uneasy calm prevails ever since the Ukrainian defenders stopped the Russian advance here. It was February 28th, they say, day 4 of the war. They want to show us how they did it, but first we have to clamber over the bridge they downed to see the armored column they managed to take out. The riverbank is littered with their skeletons, and this was a turkey shoot. Russian armored vehicles and tanks had come off the road to avoid the anti-tank mines, only to find themselves unable to cross the bridge and unable to reverse in time. Ukrainian forces tell us none of the soldiers inside survived. A little further up the road, 2 tanks have been virtually smelted, blasted almost to smithereens. 40-year-old Yevgeny, a veteran fighter, proudly tells us this was his handiwork. We all here have one role: to keep the enemy off our land, he says. First thing they did after seeing the village, they started to shell houses, just like that. They didn't see us. They didn't know we were here, so they just started to work on houses. And so I took the tank in my sights and I fired a rocket, and goodbye to him. The destroyed vehicles are stamped with an O. The Ukrainian officers here tell us this identifies them as Russian units that entered from Belarus to the north. Oleg is the officer who commanded this operation. As for now, looking at previous fighting we've had, I can tell you that we are trained better, he tells me. We have stronger morale and spirit because we're at home. They are afraid, but they go because they're made to. He's been battle-hardened ever since the first Russian invasion in 2014. He says his side has enough weapons, ammunition, and determination to win. I can tell you I'm almost sure the Russians are regrouping and not retreating, he says. Besides, we are preparing ourselves to go forward. We're not preparing just to defend here. US and British intelligence say Putin seems to have, quote, massively misjudged this situation and clearly overestimated the abilities of his military to secure a rapid victory. And this old lady tells us, I have seen one war and here we go again. I wish Putin would go away. The people of this land remain stalwart and the soldiers remain dug in, hoping they can continue to withstand whatever Putin has in store for them next. Christiana Manpour, CNN, east of Kyiv.
For information on how you can help, head on to CNN.com/impact. CNN audiences have already donated more than $7 million. Still to come this hour, the impact of inflation. You'll meet one small business owner who's now struggling to sleep at night because of the nonstop rise in prices.
Last year, we actually had our busiest year ever and our lowest profit margin ever as well.
How does that happen?
Just everything's going up.
On the next Vital Signs, we're exploring the future of medicine.
The work we are doing is joyful.
With the team that brought us the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine.
The first subject was dosed in less than 3 months.
Could their groundbreaking mRNA technology also help treat cancer? And get a sneak peek at what other innovations the future might hold, including lab-grown organs and AI-powered medical devices.
Vital Signs, today on CNN.
Today we live in an unpredictable environment and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy, and so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today?
It's crucial we make sense of what's happening.
There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the US forces in Syria going?
And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, weeknights on CNN.
I'm Barry Hurst, Energy and Sustainability Director at Schneider Electric. Schneider Electric was ranked the world's most sustainable company in 2021 by Corporate Knights, and it drew a lot of attention to what we've been working on now for over 10 years. So I think the important thing to emphasize is that it's a long-term commitment and that it takes a lot of organization to really make big strides. So the advice I would give is do strategy and action in parallel. We see a lot of companies who have a strategy but are unsure on how to implement it, and we see companies that want to get action but don't have a clear strategy. So I would say always do the two in parallel if you want to get maximum impact and really accelerate your journey.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN. The journey to the top for a successful business in Africa starts with an idea. But how does a concept become a moneymaker? African and global industry leaders share their stories. On Profit Point in CNN Marketplace Africa, in association with Dangote.
When is a cupcake much more than a cupcake? When it's from a small business struggling to weather inflation, rising fuel costs, and a job market that, frankly, has a lot more openings than available workers. That cupcake, now a symbol of the struggles nationwide, as CNN's Nadia Romero reports.
Every step of the baking process now costs more.
And then you look at your cost of goods sold and you're like, whoa.
Almost 8 years ago, Kasha and Henry Adeleye started Cupcakery in East Point, Georgia. Their baking business almost a bust during pandemic shutdowns.
So that first 2 weeks was probably the scariest time of my life, period, because we just did not know.
But Cupcakery has kept baking and surviving. The president touting booming job growth nationwide. Wages up, unemployment down. Georgia Commissioner of Labor Mark Butler says the state's an example of record-breaking bounce back.
You take a look right now in Georgia, we have been breaking records in a lot of the different sectors, like we're talking about professional services, healthcare, warehousing, transportation, and so we're doing really good all the way around.
But inflation plagues the economy. Deliveries carried Cupcakery through COVID. But now skyrocketing gas prices sour the sweet treats.
Gas prices are ridiculous, so we had to, increase our delivery costs for the first time ever.
And baking staples.
It's doubled the cost for each cupcake at this point.
In 2019, Cupcakery would pay about $18 per 15 dozen eggs. Now
they are $55 for 15 dozen.
Cream cheese, about $6 per 3-pound loaf. Now
$11 per loaf, so almost double the price of that.
Their bottom line just didn't add up.
Last year, we actually had our busiest year ever and our lowest profit margin ever as well.
How does that happen?
Just everything's going up like tenfold.
Your total will be $39.81.
So for the first time, Cupcakery's cupcakes now cost 5 to 10% more.
If you want a cupcake, we've got to charge the cost to make them.
Banana pudding, red velvet.
Customers take note.
I did frequent another bakery where their cakes they're nice, but the prices are excessive. So again, another reason for me to come and have the opportunity to try something different at a cost that I feel is inviting.
A recent U.S. Chamber of Commerce survey shows most small business owners have raised their prices due to inflation, while also making big changes to attract a strong workforce.
I still think we're a ways off to figuring out what the landscape is going to look like, because there's been so many resets when it comes to the cost of goods, the cost of doing business, and wages.
With baby number 2 on the way, the Adeleyes fight to open a second Cupcakery location despite their challenges.
Some days you can't sleep at night when you see the numbers, but we're a business and we know we have to stay in business.
Georgia Commissioner of Labor Mark Butler says when inflation is driven by increases in wages, that's not something you can easily roll back. But he says answering the question of how do you stop inflation is harder now than it's ever been.
Erica? That's for sure. Nadia, appreciate it. Thank you. As Russia's war on Ukraine rattles oil markets around the world, President Biden is planning to tap into the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve in an effort to help combat high gas prices, authorizing the release of 1 million barrels of oil a day for the next 6 months. Earlier, I spoke with Bob McNally, president of Rapid Energy, to ask if this will actually ease the burden on Americans at the pump.
Unfortunately, probably not in a good way. Oil prices are probably headed higher because while the U.S. consumes about 20 million barrels a day, the right way to think about the United States adding 1 million barrels a day from strategic stocks is to compare it to the amount of oil that we could lose from Russia due to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Russia is the world's largest oil exporter at almost 8 million barrels a day. Some 3 million barrels a day is directly threatened by sanctioning or self-sanctioning. So the problem the president has, and we all have, because crude oil prices in the world is what determines our local gasoline price, is that 1 million barrels a day isn't enough to address the Russia problem. So unfortunately, as long as Russia it poses a problem to the global oil market, a disruption risk, gasoline prices are probably headed higher.
So they're probably headed higher, but, you know, again, just put this in perspective for us. The U.S. is not Europe, which relies on Russia for what, some 40%, right, of oil and gas and its energy. The U.S. does not rely on Russia like that. So just remind us again, why is it so important what's happening with Russian oil if we're not really using it in the U.S.?
Right. Well, the hard truth about the oil market is that even if you're like the United States, blessed to be self-sufficient in oil, we are a net exporter of oil. But it doesn't matter because a supply disruption anywhere leads to a price increase everywhere, including here. All consumers, whether you're Saudi Arabia, Canada, the United States, an importing country, China, it doesn't matter. We all pay the same price, and that's determined in the global crude oil market pool.
So when we look at that price, right, so releasing these barrels of oil every day for the next 6 months may not have a big impact at the pump, might have a psychological impact, right, even perhaps on the markets. Eventually, we're going to need to replenish that back into the strategic reserves. Typically, that's done, from what I understand, when oil is pretty cheap. Do we have to worry about now replacing these barrels, these 180 million barrels, at today's prices?
Well, I don't think the administration will replace at these prices or higher, most likely. They will wait until oil prices go lower, say $80 a barrel or $70 a barrel is what I believe they are thinking about, if we see those prices again anytime soon. But, you know, if we don't refill the reserves, we're in trouble because there are all kinds of other disruptions in the world. Houthis are attacking Saudi facilities. Libya is unstable. If we don't replenish that emergency reserve in the coming years, we'll be even more vulnerable to price spikes when, as they always do, these geopolitical disruptions occur. So one way or the other, filling the SPR is going to be a challenge.
But just you say if we don't replenish in the coming years. So just to, I don't want people to freak out too much at home, right? So we're talking about 180 million barrels. There will still be more than 400 million barrels, correct me if my math is wrong there, in the strategic reserves, which are also there for things that happen in the United States, right? So natural disaster, other issues here. Are we okay for the time being?
You know, not really. Unfortunately, Congress, and this has been a bipartisan problem, Erica, this is Democrats and Republicans, have been very irresponsible with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It has been sold down since 2008 when we had it over 700 million barrels to 568 now, down 21%. And that's to pay for non-emergency expenses. And in addition to the 180 million barrels, there are more barrels that are being sold, again, just to pay for regular expenses. So I think they're going to see a need to have to replenish this because the world is still dangerous and consumers are still vulnerable to these price spikes.
Let me ask you one other question. You know, we talk so much right now, understandably, about the price of oil. It's been seesawing around $100. It's up, it's down one day, depending on, you know, what's being talked about in Washington, what's happening overseas. Should we really be, as consumers, right, if we're not trading this oil, should we be looking at this every day? Or is this more like your 401k, where you're told, don't look at this every day. It's going to continue to change, and a lot of it's out of your control?
Yeah, you know, I think you should look at sort of averages. The volatility now is even making professional traders dizzy and fall down. It's crazy, the volatility we are seeing in the oil market. So I wouldn't worry about that as a consumer. I would just look at the general trend, the averages over recent weeks, and that is headed higher, unfortunately. And I think it will continue to do so as long as Russia poses one of the biggest disruption risks in modern times to the global oil market. So look at those averages.
Bob McNally, great to have you with us. Thank you. Just a little more perspective for you here. Let's take a look. AAA put out today's national average. This is for a gallon of regular unleaded. So today it's $4.20. Last month it was $3.66. Last year, maybe you don't want to look at that. I'm not even going to say it out loud. It's too painful. Up next here, a chilling warning from scientists in California. Why a lack of snow means the state's drought could get much, much worse.
Should be standing on roughly 5 feet of snow, so my feet should be roughly right here.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Across Africa, businesses are working together like never before. All new on CNN, Connecting Africa.
Join me and Lenny Jokos as we crisscross the continent to show you how new connections are revolutionizing commerce in Africa.